Wide-angle macro photography is really starting to gain popularity right now within the macro community. And it's easy to see why. It gives you the chance to photograph tiny subjects while also showing the world they live in. It's storytelling in a single frame. We're looking at something quite special today. The Laowa 15mm f4.5 0.5x wide-angle macro lens. I have both the RF and the EF version of their lens, and I've been using this lens for several weeks now, and I've got a lot to share. From its unique design to its strengths, quirks and frustrations, we're deep diving into whether this lens is right one for you and your macro kit. So this is not your typical macro lens. The Laowa 15mm gives you a 110.5 degree angle of view and 0.5 times magnification on full frame sensors. That's a combo you don't see every day. Now this new 15mm lens is a replacement for their existing 15mm lens that is a 1:1 magnification lens. I had a lot more fun using this lens than their previous lens. With it being an ultra-wide lens, you do have to get very, very close to your subject, but that's something we'll talk about later in the video. Let's quickly talk about the tech specs of this lens. It has a focal length of 15mm with an aperture range between 4.5 to f32. And again, the magnification is a 1:2 lens, so it is a half life size magnification. So it's more of a close-up lens than a macro lens. Minimum focusing distance is 129mm, and the working distance is just 36mm. That's very short. It's a manual focus only lens and weighs at just 308 grams. It has 16 elements in 11 groups, 2 aspherical elements, 3 HR elements and 3 ED elements. It also has a filter size of 62mm on the front here. So unlike other wide angle lenses, it doesn't bulge out, so you can actually get filters on the front. And again, it is a half life size, so it's a 1:2 lens. So it's more of a close-up lens than it is a true macro lens. Well, let's not nitpick. The images look great. Very unique lens. It's available for Canon RF, EF, Sony E, Nikon Z and F, and the L mount. It's compact, it's lightweight, made out of metal, high quality construction as you would expect from a Laowa lens. But you know me, I don't really care about tech specs. I'm more interested in how this performs and what my images look like. Let's take a look. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the EF version, and then I'll talk about the RF version and the lens as a whole, because there are some subtle differences between the EF version and the RF version. So the difference between the R mount lens and the EF mount lens is the EF mount has an auto aperture, so the lens can communicate to the camera. This is also supported on the Sony E mount and the Nikon Z mount. So if you find it difficult using full manual lenses, you do have the option to have the EF version, use the Canon converter to convert it to your R mount camera, or if you've got an EF mount camera, it'll go straight on there natively. And then you're able to select your aperture within your camera, but when you're focusing and when you're trying to set up your scene and your composition, your aperture will be wide open until you take the shot. Now on the R mount, which is the same for the L mount and the Nikon F mount, it's a full manual lens, which means you have an aperture ring on here. It's a clickable, you can hear the click when you're moving it. So essentially you set your f-stop on the lens and then you're setting your scene up. And again, the only difference is on the full manual lens, your aperture is set, so you might find it quite difficult in dark areas, depending on your light, of course. But the EF version has auto aperture. That's the only difference between these two lenses. With the EF mount adapter, they are basically the same. Let me take the cap off so you can see. They are basically the same. So the RF mount is simply the EF version with an extended tube on there. But if we take off the adapter, you can see there the difference between the two lenses. And on testing, I can't find any difference between the quality of the lens between the EF and the RF. So there's no difference between the DSLR version and the mirrorless version. This lens is all about context. Instead of isolating your subject against a creamy background, this lens lets you tell a story. Damselfly getting ready to roost in the evening, or a spider on its web next to a pool, It shows the environment, and when it works beautifully. Let's talk image quality, because wide-angle macro lenses are tricky when it comes to sharpness and depth of field. Here's what I found from my testing. At 4.5, which is wide open, this lens is a little bit soft. Between 5.6 and f16, it's sharp and usable. But after f16, so f22 up to f32, diffraction does become very noticeable. The sweet spot is in between f5.6 and f16. On most of my testing, I kept it at around f11. And that is simply because it's one of the clickable ones on the RF lens. Even though the lens opens up to f4.5, I wouldn't recommend it using it wide open. Not because of the slight softness you get, but because the background ends up being very blurred and you lose all of that all-important environmental detail, which basically goes against the reason why you're using this lens in the first place. So definitely stop down. I would recommend the minimum being f8, so between f8 and f16 I think is the sweet spot where this lens performs brilliantly. Another down point, or something you should be aware of this lens, is the distortion. It's only sharp in the center of the image. As you move out towards the edges of the image, you get distortion and like softness, as you can see from these examples. So you can see from this shot here, I tried realigning the damselfly so that it was on the rule of thirds. It resulted in some distortion and blurriness. So my recommendation is your subject goes dead center of your frame, and then you can always recompose afterwards, particularly if you've got a high megapixel camera. Here's where things do get tricky, and that is the working distance at 1:2 magnification. It is just 36mm. Okay. Which means you are often right on top of your subject. That makes it very easy to scare off insects or even block your own light. And that was actually the biggest issue. It wasn't scaring off the insects at all. I found many insects that were quite cooperative and would allow me to take their photo. However, with this setup currently as it is, and you see here, even in bright sunlight, in fact bright sunlight is probably the worst condition. If it was overcast, you'd be okay because everything is shaded. But in sunlight, I was getting that close that the shadow from the lens would go onto my subject, meaning that the background would be exposed correctly, but my subject would be underexposed. Now, of course, you can correct things in post. You can wait till there's an overcast day, but even the trick of bringing out a diffuser or having my wife stand behind me wasn't fixing this because of the wide angle. You have to have a cloud blocking the sun for it to work. Now, currently, while I was testing this setup, we've mostly been having a heat wave, so there's hardly any clouds around, so I needed to fix up a solution. To solve the problem, I used a Godax flash with a Cygnus Tech diffuser, just like that. And it works brilliantly. I exposed for the background and then used the flash to fill in the subject, and it did work very, very well. If you're thinking about using this lens, I'd say a flash it's not essential. It will help you out in a lot of situations where it's either too bright or it's too dark. The flash is going to be very helpful. Again, I think the best conditions for this particular lens would be an overcast day where the light is even and you're not going to be casting a shadow on your subject. I also tested this lens on an R6 Mark II, and the image stabilization from that camera helped a lot when doing this type of wide-angle macro photography. So if you do have a newer camera, you are going to get better results than you will do with my EOS R. I'm always dishing the EOS R. It's coming to the end of its lifetime. I've already said if I could afford an upgrade to the R6 Mark II, I definitely would. Another thing to be aware of, and that is focusing is very hard with this lens. As you can imagine, being a wide angle, there is a critical focus point with this lens where it is pin sharp, and a lot of times I missed it. You can't rely on focus peaking as well. Focus peaking in many times was telling me that I had the focus, and when I got home I found I had just missed that critical point. So my tip here is to take more shots than you think you need. Nail that focus by moving the camera forward and backwards if necessary to make sure you get that critical focus. But, and this is a big but, when everything lines up, this lens delivers some absolutely stunning result. When the light is right, the subject stays still, and the background complements the scene, it creates images you just can't get with any traditional macro lens. So, is the Laowa 15mm f4.5 0.5 times wide angle macro lens worth it? I think it is. It's one of those lenses where you're not going to use it all the time, but when you haven't got it with you, you always find a scene or a subject that could take advantage of this lens. It's not beginner friendly at all, so don't think you're going to slap this on there as a beginner and get wicked shots, because it's not going to happen. It takes practice, it takes a lot of practice and a fair bit of frustration. But if you're looking to add something unique to your macro portfolio and you're willing to put in the work, this lens offers a unique look that most lenses cannot match. Just remember to shoot between 5.6 and f16, bring a flash just in case you need it, and don't trust the focus peaking too much. I found myself having to just take more shots than I needed, as I've said before, but then when you get that one shot, it makes it all worth it. This is definitely something that needs to be in my kit bag for this year. There's a link to the Laowa website in the description below to this lens, so you can check out the full spec and the current pricing of the lens. But if you found this review helpful, consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing for more macro and wildlife gear reviews. I want to thank Laowa for sending over the 15mm ultra wide macro lens for review. It's much appreciated. But that's where I'm going to leave this video. My name's Stewart Wood, and again, as always, I'll see you on the next one.